Welcome to this webinar. Before we begin the presentation, I want to provide you with a few housekeeping items. On your screen, you will see a taskbar with icons. Each icon is assigned to a particular element of today's webinar. After the webinar is over, please take our survey to tell us how we've done. Throughout the presentation, you can network with others or submit questions to the speakers in the box next to the slides. Download resources from the folder icon. Today's event is being recorded and archived and will be available within 24 hours. For on-demand questions or comments, send us an email by clicking Email Us. If you experience any technical issues today, please refresh your browser by hitting F5 for a PC or Command-R for Macs, or email webinars@bmpmedia.com for one-on-one support. And now I'm excited to turn it over to today's moderator.
Good morning and welcome to this webinar, Discover How Kwik Trip Improved Food Safety and Quality Management. This event, brought to you by Food Engineering, is sponsored by Schneider Electric. And I'm your moderator, Deborah Shugg, Editor-in-Chief of Food Engineering Magazine. Thanks for joining us. Today's presenters are Keith Chambers and Scott Schiebel. Keith is responsible for strategic direction, commercialization, and development for Schneider Electric Software's operations management portfolio. Keith has over 20 years' experience in the automation software and MES business with a focus on manufacturing operations software in the food and beverage, CPG, and life sciences industries. And Scott has over 25 years of engineering and support experience in automation and operations technology solutions supporting the food and beverage industry. In his role as Automation and Controls Manager, he oversees all manufacturing operations technologies at Kwik Trip. This includes the design, implementation, standardization, and management of the SAP ERP system, the Wonderware MES, as well as the production automation systems. Please don't forget to submit your questions, and later today in the program, our presenters will address as many as possible. Also remember, today's event is being recorded and archived on foodengineeringmag.com. So now I'd like to turn it over to today's presenters, Keith Chambers and Scott Schiebel.
All right, thank you very much, Deborah. This is Keith Chambers. I'm going to kick it off and really just wanted to put a little bit of what Scott's going to talk about in a broader context of the industry. And I'll start by talking a little bit about what we see as some of the global trends that are driving the market environment for food and beverages. And there's really three kind of mega trends, I guess, we will talk about. Demographic changes, which really it doesn't just talk about population growth. Population growth in the short term isn't really driving kind of manufacturing or changes in manufacturing today. It's relatively small in the short term. But what is very significant about the population of the world is really the changes that are happening kind of underneath the surface. So a year or so back, we used to talk about how by 2020, over 50% of the world's middle class would be living in APAC, which is quite a surprising number for a lot of people. Turns out we were actually wrong. A recent update by the United Nations on their kind of population statistics shows that we actually crossed that threshold in 2012. By 2020, however, over 50% of the world's population will be considered to be in the global middle class, and that has some huge implications for food. As people become more affluent and move into the middle class, they undergo what's known as a nutritional transition, moving towards more of a plant-based protein diet, which in turn kind of has, again, obvious implications for the regional demand and growth for food. So that's one of the demographic changes we see. We see people getting older, again, going back to some statistics from the United Nations. By 2050, I believe, 2020, for the first time in at least recent history, or since we've been counting, there'll be more people over 60 than there are under 6. So more older people than there are younger people. Again, a complete flip in the world population demographics. And again, as people get older, their nutritional needs change, as do their buying habits and what kind of food and beverages they may be consuming. So demographic change is absolutely causing some big changes and drivers on the market for manufacturers. And hand in hand with that is sustainability. as these kind of changes in demand from demographics drive in, of course, it's a fixed resource base that we have in terms of water, land, and our ability to produce food. So the need to sustain and manage the resources that we have becomes more and more apparent. So sustainability is another large trend that we see. Final trend that I like to talk about is consumer expectations. As technology has kind of connected us and united us kind of globally, so our expectations as consumers have changed. We've become much better educated. We have instant access to information around quality and food safety and nutrition that we didn't have before. And going along with that is a concern for our own health and safety, and the confidence that we have. You know, it's well known in the food and beverage industry that brands are very important. People tend to buy the brands that they trust, and so consumer confidence is a key part of those consumer expectations. They need to trust the businesses and the products and the brands of which they use. So they're kind of the three big trends. And as we see that narrowing down to manufacturing, we see kind of 4 or 5 of these kind of market drivers for manufacturers. The first one being pressure on margins. So food and beverage is traditionally a fairly low margin business. If you look at the average food and beverage, the operating margin of companies in that space is typically around 5%. And so pressure on margin, as companies look to deliver more for same or lower prices, puts tremendous pressure on margins. Need for variety, we talked about that. You only need to go to your local supermarket and walk down the free-from aisle, gluten-free, fat-free, sugar-free, organic, et cetera, et cetera. Consumers are hungry for variety, and that obviously puts pressure on those companies that are manufacturing to supply that variety. Regulatory obligations increasing as always. There's a large percentage of people who work for governmental organizations that are dedicated to regulate, monitor, and control what goes on. And so we see those regulatory obligations for manufacturers increasing, particularly around safety and healthfulness. So that's kind of the topic of today's webinar. And not that such topics need to be necessarily regulated, but certainly to make things orderly, governments do put regulations in. So these are things like the Food Safety Modernization Act, for instance, here in the U.S., that dictates and requires certain information and certain access to information in ways that wasn't really required a few years ago. Capital expenditure constraints, again, while we have kind of shifting demand, for the most part, capital is fairly tight for food and beverage manufacturers. It's not a high-margin business, so they don't attract a lot of capital. There's still investment, new plants, greenfield assets that are being put into play, but they're primarily going where the demand is. So I talked a little bit about the growth of the middle class in Asia Pacific and how that's transitioning their diet to more animal-based proteins. So as that happens, you see new dairy plants and other capital investments happening in that region that maybe aren't being spent in North America or Europe, some of the more mature manufacturing markets. And then final impact there is response to consumers. As we talked about how connected consumers are today. When there are issues, particularly food safety issues, absolutely key that a business and manufacturer can respond to issues and communicate effectively to their consumers to build and maintain the trust they have. So those are kind of what we see happening out in the market, and we've kind of showed that over there on the left of this slide. Fortunately, we have technology. New technology is bringing kind of helping us solve or address some of those market drivers. And they show up as those 5 what we call operational imperatives or business outcomes that we see food and beverage manufacturers looking to gain from their businesses. So improving their operational performance, maximizing the reliability of their assets, bringing agility to their manufacturing facilities so they can meet those needs for variety, ensuring that the quality and safety of the products they produce is to specification and is able to meet consumer expectations, and finally assuring that they have the objective evidence of regulatory compliance as required by various kinds of state, federal, local regulatory bodies. So those kind of collection of business outcomes or operations imperatives are kind of collectively what drives the current trends around digital transformation that a lot of companies are undergoing in this space to really try and address and deliver on some of those business outcomes. So if you look at a manufacturing concern or business operation, we really see it, or we break it down in terms of two big life cycles of activities that go on there. And the first is the asset cycle, the asset life cycle, and that's really around first the engineering and design of those assets, the capital projects, bringing them into service, the monitoring and control of those assets once they're in place and producing, and then ensuring that they are reliable and available as needed. So that's the maintenance and the asset performance piece. So those three kind of boxes or groups of activity collectively form that asset's life cycle. And there's a second life cycle there as well, which we call the operations life cycle, which intersects with the assets in the monitoring control piece. But this is really about kind of operationally how a business will use those assets, planning and scheduling of the operation to be profitable, again, monitoring, controlling, running the assets, and then ensuring that the products produced are safe and profitable, working within the regulatory constraints. So those are the two kind of life cycles that we address as a technology vendor in the space. So we have portfolio offers that really address all five of those boxes in that plus. And within that plus, there's really a set of value propositions that we can deliver. The one that we're going to be talking about specifically today is safety, quality, and compliance management, and that's a great part of the Kwik Trip story, as Scott will go through. So up on the slide, there's a number of kind of points around the business value this brings, some of the results. I think Kwik Trip and the great results they have will speak for themselves. So I won't go through this in any detail, but I will at this point hand it over to Scott and invite you to really sit back and enjoy what Kwik Trip have done, because they had a great system, great results. So Scott.
Thank you, Keith. I'm Scott Schiebel, and as was previously stated, I'm the Automation Controls Manager here at Kwik Trip, and I'm part of a team of developers and engineers and analysts that are providing the traditional OT functions to our company. And before I get into what we're doing here, I want to talk a little bit about who we are. We're one of those biggest companies you may have never heard of here, headquartered in La Crosse, Wisconsin. We're a convenience store retailer, and we have stores throughout Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa. We have a large centralized corporate campus where we manage our corporate operations. We have all of our manufacturing facilities, our distribution, our truck shops, et cetera, are all here and localized in La Crosse. Our company's family-owned, 53 years in operation, and currently there's 3 generations of owners actively involved in the company. Every day we see them walking the hallways, and they all know us by name, so that's important to us. Currently we have 650 stores, and annually we're adding roughly 40 to 50 stores that are about 7,000 square foot within the 3 states that we cover. Each week we serve 7 million guests, our customers, about our 650 stores. And one of the challenges we've been faced with within our industry is attrition. And there's a number of measures ownership has taken to try and maintain a good company balance of employees with experience, and one of those is a very lucrative profit-sharing plan that works out well. If we do well, we all receive similar rewards. Right now, we have about 22,000 employees and roughly 2,500 here in La Crosse. One thing that's unique in our industry for us as well is we're vertically integrated. What that means is we make it, we ship it, and we sell it. And that provides a lot of benefits, beginning with maintaining margins. We have control of our margins. There's no middleman per se. And we also have control of our product. We control quality from manufacturing all the way to the shelves in our retail stores. We produce roughly 80% of our own product, and we deliver fresh every day to our stores. So our margins are low, and we're finding we compare and compete very well against some of the big box stores in some of our products. And we also offer products that are generally more fresh. Annual growth, roughly 15% in our food side of the business, and we're expanding throughout the regions we cover all the time. Another thing that's unique about us is we have an industry-leading product development group here where we're always researching new products that sometimes come from Europe or other places. Within the plants here, we're highly automated. We have 4 plants, a bread and bun plant, which is in the process built, a bakery where we manufacture all our sweet goods, our muffins, cookies, cinnamon rolls, etc. We have a dairy where we process all our own milk, we manufacture our own ice cream, and we produce isotonics, flavored waters, teas, etc. And lastly, we have a commissary where we manufacture our ready-to-eat products. That would include things like salads and sandwiches and pizzas and soups and so forth. Culture is important here, and our culture embraces innovation. And that provides us better quality through tools like MES that I'll talk about here shortly. It helps our coworkers by embracing automation, helps us manage our labor better. It keeps our costs down for all the reasons we've all heard before with respect to efficiency and managing waste. And it keeps us better suited from a regulatory perspective for things like FISMA, as Keith mentioned, but also internal audits that we're always doing and being SQF ready here at Kwik Trip. So a little bit on where we're at and how we got here. Our plants were built MES ready. They're all within 10 years old, and they were standardized in their network design, and our infrastructure was built for manufacturing. Oftentimes, IT gets involved after the fact, and the infrastructure, as I'm sure many of us have experienced, is built more for an office environment. Well, of course, manufacturing is much more of a high-speed environment, so we accounted for that in our design. We also accounted for mobility in our design and ensured that we had very robust Wi-Fi in all areas of our plants. Did comprehensive studies and surveys, making sure we had the adequate coverage to support mobility, not only in MES, but other systems as well. We started this process about 5 years ago, and we had some successes and we had some challenges along the way. And one of the challenges we faced was finding the right integration partner that shared our beliefs and was forward-thinking enough, especially in terms of mobility and the value we saw with mobility in our future with MES. So once we settled on the right system integrator, Callisto Integration, we were ready to move forward, and along the way we also completed a frame study where we did a very detailed analysis that lasted about 4 months, and we had an outside firm come in and evaluate how much waste there was in our plants, what there might have been for an ROI on any investments that were made, helping us determine what software was best suited for us, understanding the risks, etc. And surprisingly enough, we found that there was not the traditional low-hanging fruit out there that we've seen. in other places. So we needed to focus on specific areas that would provide benefits, but sometimes what might be some of those intangibles. As part of this process, we also had the opportunity to expose other business units to MES and the value it provided. So that went all the way up to our executive level, and they understood the relevance of MES and the role it plays in manufacturing, but also on an enterprise perspective as well. The outcome of our process was pretty clear. Again, there wasn't a real lucrative ROI here, but we knew we had opportunities to enhance our quality management, our recipe management, and address genealogy and the track and trace requirements that FISMA requires us to have in place. But we also discovered we had an ERP challenge. We had a legacy system. It's an AS400-based system that was homegrown, roughly 25 years old, that had been running our plants for a number of years, as well as our retail stores. And about that same time, we had a separate project going online where we were reviewing ERP and trying to establish something that would be best suited for our significant growth. And as you'll see here shortly, we settled on SAP for that. So our journey started in our kitchens at Ready to Eat plant. And as of right now, our kitchens is completely done. I'll talk a little more about that shortly. And we have 11 lines all supported by MES. We've also completed a design phase of our next plant, our bread and bun bakery. We're calling that System Focus, and I'll talk a little bit about that in my last slide. So what did we decide to do here in our deployment is we wanted a tool that was standardized for all of our plants. So object-based, model-driven, as it shows here. We wanted something that would help the coworkers on the floor. All of our employees we refer to as coworkers, and we needed to provide them the guidance and have some level of accountability to help prevent mistakes. So we did that through standardized work, and through our accountability piece, we understand who's on the line, where they're working, and when they were there, and we're capturing all of that in MES. We also recognize the value of master data, and that's a corporate initiative I'll touch on a little bit. But for MES, master data means to us master recipes, master vendor information, quality limits, cost, etc. From a food safety and quality assurance piece, our model had to provide the accuracy, consistency, ingredients, meet the regulatory requirements, and so on and so forth. Reporting, we manage all our reporting internally and do a great job of having the necessary visibility to all the processes that run, and we can aggregate data and analyze the information coming out of our lines to better understand our costs, our quality, and so forth. And lastly is costs. We needed visibility to costs. As I said, we have that through reports. Historical information is right there at our fingertips, as is product information. So the software we chose was Wonderware. Schneider Electric's Workflow BPM workflow forms was the tool that really has been instrumental to us. Workflow forms is supporting our mobility requirement nicely because it's HTML5, so it's really platform agnostic. We run our mobile tablets right now, our iPads, but they could easily be a Windows tablet or an Android tablet as well. And the beauty of the HTML5 is it's web-based, so we're not taxed with client-specific licensing like has traditionally been done for similar situations. So it's just a web page that the coworkers can access and basically run their lines with MES. Our MES itself is made up of the operations, performance, and quality modules, and we do have an interface to SAP I'll talk about in a little bit, and we're using the WEI, Wonderware Enterprise Integrator, for that. And this is a system platform-based solution, and we are using Historian to capture that historical data. So a little bit about SAP and MES. As I mentioned, our projects were aligned or nearing alignment roughly 3 years ago, and we realized that there were benefits of having the interfaces built right out of the gate with our MES and our SAP solutions. So we actually delayed our MES solution, or our deployment, by about 3 months and allowed our systems integrators to sit in the same room together and figure out what sort of information could be transacted between ERP and MES. So Callisto Integration worked with our SAP integrator and developed a list of transactions and helped us understand the importance of these, and really helped us start to understand the importance of master data and where this lives. So we also accounted for some of the other areas that were non-manufacturing, things like accounting, areas like accounting, IT, et cetera. We also realized that we needed a tool for us to be able to receive raw ingredients into our plants. So we created a tool within Workflow and Workflow Forms called Perl's Production Receiving, Logging, and Labeling System. It's where Genealogy starts, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So we deployed MES and SAP in the same day in November of 2015, and we deployed it on 2 lines, our soup and our pizza line, and then across the company for SAP. One other area that we were very conscientious of is best practices in maintaining consistencies between the plants. We still meet regularly with our plants and review with them the best practices that we define right from the get-go in our deployments, and ensuring that we're using the tools and maximizing the benefits by those tools. So this slide here kind of just gives you a visual of how we brought all these systems together. MES and SAP are interfaced, and then we have an interface to our warehouse management system, and everything is based upon master data, or one version of the truth. Implementation, just a little bit here on all of the considerations that we put together for the deployment, the timelines, managing risk, and successfully communicating those risks. And then mobility. As I mentioned, we're using the iPads for material consumption. We're starting our process orders and suspending process orders and completing process orders from our tablets. We perform most quality checks with our tablets. And again, with us across 11 lines now, we always have quality checks going on throughout our facility. And we like the tablets because they're flexible and they're not tied to a line. We can move between lines in our current environment. We also designed a basically off-the-shelf cart that allowed us a more permanent experience in the form of a power cart. And it's a battery-operated cart with a printer on it and a touchscreen monitor and an RFID card reader for us to be badging in and out of our areas for that accountability piece. We also are leveraging our Wi-Fi through the use of a mobile Wi-Fi scale, so we can move these scales in and out of the lines, and at the end of the day we can move them out and allow us to clean the lines appropriately. Here's a little bit more on our Perl system, Production Receiving, Logging, and Labeling System. As I said, it's where Genealogy starts. This is interfaced through WEI to SAP, and we are actually receiving against an SAP purchase order at the point of the raw ingredient hitting our plants. And we can customize quality requirements for each raw material through MES Client. We also have expanded our Perl system to our raw milk intake area. That's a whole different set of quality requirements, and we found that Workflow and Workflow Forms was versatile enough that with the support from Callisto, we were able to add on to our standard Perl system and capture all of the additional requirements in our dairy receiving. Here's just a visual aid that shows us a little bit of the interface messages that we defined right from the start, and 2.5 years later we're still using them. As you can see, SAP, that master data begins with process orders and purchase orders and vendor information and articles. All that data is pushed down to MES, and then MES receives those products and sends back to SAP the quantity received, how much we've consumed when we're starting a process order and consuming the raw ingredients, how much we produced as we're finalizing process orders. It has the capabilities of pushing labor to SAP, and process order confirmation. Again, we're starting, suspending, completing process orders. And SAP is our inventory control system, so that's why it's important that we're capturing consumption as well. This is just an example of how we're capturing genealogy at the point of consumption. When we receive a raw ingredient, it might be a pallet of cheese. In this example, our Perl system creates a sticker that we put on the pallet that shows the use-by date, when we received it, the manufacturing lot information, creates an MES scannable lot number, and then some text that will help the people pulling these raw ingredients from the warehouses. At the point of receipt, we're doing quality validation. So the vendor truck pulls up to our door, and the first thing we do is start receiving against an MES, or excuse me, a purchase order. And now we have ingredients that are part of that purchase orders, or articles that are part of that purchase orders, and there are specific quality checks that are configured in MES client that walk us through what we need to be capturing in terms of quality validation for every item that we received in all of our plants. Genealogy and track and trace. MES has provided us really a fingertip click away from anything regarding genealogy that we may need in our MES plant. Our mock recalls are done regularly by our QA teams. We can understand how much we received, when it was consumed, where it was consumed, and which process order, and what products was it consumed within. So in our kitchens, as an example, that cheese example I used earlier obviously would be used in pizzas, so we could look at that MES lot number and tell anyone exactly what finished goods that cheese went into. In terms of what did we gain by this, we went from roughly 2.5 hours searching paper records for genealogy information to really less than 10 minutes now with our very strong reporting that we have in place. So the benefits, what are we getting from this? As I said, we didn't have the low-hanging fruit. Our current design doesn't have a lot of automated performance capturing in it, but it is very quality-centric, and it supports our master data initiatives with regard to quality limits and recipes and so forth. We find our reporting accuracy is nearly perfect, and we have exactly the visibility we need. We started with just a handful of reports, and we've now created well over 100 reports internally, meeting the needs of all the stakeholders within the company. We also have better inventory management, and that's because SAP is managing our inventories, but MES is consuming those ingredients and updating that SAP inventory at the point of consumption. It supports FISMA and the track and trace requirements, state and federal regulations. We're well positioned for the FISMA requirements to evolve, if they do, as well as SQF certifications. All of our plants are level 3 SQF certified. We have a process order label validation tool, or labor validation tool, I should say. Our recipes in SAP not only are made up of raw ingredients, but also labor. So through the use of MES workflow forms, we can capture the coworkers on the lines and tally how many hours they put into a process order, and then the product managers, production managers can compare that actual labor time against what the recipe had. So it allows us to have more accurate information in terms of labor costs. Standardized quality checks. We work very closely with our quality teams, our food safety teams, to ensure that the quality checks that we're developing in one plant would be applicable to the next plant. So the tools we're creating with that model-driven approach and the objects that are supporting those tools are standardized that allow us to more easily deploy internally some of these future quality checks. Error reduction goes without saying. When you're consuming things with barcode scanners and capturing all the genealogy and MES lot numbers versus writing on paper, you minimize your errors significantly. One common reporting tools, we're using SSRS and creating our own SQL reports, and are always impacting decisions made in our plants because of the data we're provided. Real-time data on the plant floor, and best of all, no paper. So one of the keys to success for us, and something that we continue to strive for, is understanding the relevance of master data within not only production but also across our entire company. And we took a close look at this from the beginning and are continually reviewing what is master data, where does it live. You can see here in this slide our SAP master data includes the item master, the recipe information, vendor, purchase order, and then master data in MES would include quality checks and limits, the SSOPs, the CCP information, our genealogy, and our vendor master information that isn't in SAP. So through WEI, talking through PI and SAP, we're able to continually transact all of this master data back and forth. And this is my last slide. This shows how we have evolved with MES. Our next deployment will be coming up later this year, and Callisto is helping us understand how MES will apply on the plant floor right into the automation layer. So we're looking at on the operations side, anywhere where we have kitting or batching or recipe management, quality checks, our LIMS system will be interfaced now. We'll continue to have labor tracking and genealogy. We'll have SCADA. We're using InTouch in our new plant. And all of this will be supported by trending and data archiving, alarm management. We're in a big push right now for OEE and understanding the relevance of OEE and downtime. From an environmental perspective, MES is going to help us capture the plant environment, so temperature, humidity, air pressure, and so forth. Energy management, we will be using Schneider Electric's PME tool to help us understand our energy usage, help us manage our peaks, and be better positioned to manage our loads as a result of that. We'll also have an interface to warehouse management and a automated storage and retrieval system that will provide automatic order picking and essentially do everything but load our trucks with bread in the new plant. And lastly, of course, is ERP. Our design in ERP really isn't going to be changing because we accounted for just about everything we needed to with our initial deployment, but we'll certainly make good use of all the transactions between ERP and MES and some of these other peripheral systems. So that is all I had.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Keith, and also Scott, for a really great presentation. A lot of great ideas there, a lot of great takeaways. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to open the floor for questions. Our presenters will go ahead and address some of the questions that have been already received, but if you have questions, please submit them. And what I will go into first is a question about additional plant efficiency benefits through the MES implementation. Are there any additional things that you could talk about? Why don't you go ahead and take that, Scott?
As I mentioned, our design in our current plant wasn't focused on efficiency. It was more quality and food safety related. So right now, there's not a lot of efficiency gains there, but our next deployment will certainly be better suited for that. I
see. And Keith, do you have anything to add to that about additional efficiencies?
No, other than, as Scott noted, they have all of the infrastructure and data collection in place to be able to capitalize on that. One of the things that's very interesting about Kwik Trip is kind of their approach into it. A lot of businesses, customers we see come into MES and these types of systems by looking at efficiency, essentially cost, whereas Kwik Trip was more around kind of quality and traceability. So they brought a different viewpoint to it, equally valid, and as Scott talked about, they got great results.
Great. Okay, perfect. And Scott, how long did it take to implement the MES across your plants?
Right now, we have it implemented across one plant and 11 lines. It took us roughly 9 months, and we deployed it in 2 phases.
Great. Okay. And were you able to reduce the repeated MES deployment efforts across throughout this process? And if so, how and how much?
By standardizing in our tools and using the model-driven approach that Workflow really supports nicely, we are better suited now for future deployments. By the way our objects were created, they can be deployed because they were standardized not just for the first plant, but for all of our different manufacturing facilities.
Okay. And I think you went into it towards the end there, but can you talk about any other quality management systems that you use and if you've integrated any of those into the MES?
We have a LIMS system that we just deployed roughly a year ago that with our next MES deployment will be integrated through WEI, and we will have that lab data now tied to an MES lot number for raw ingredients or a process order for finished goods.
I see. And one of our viewers had a question regarding your quality checks. Do you have inline testing as part of your checks?
We have inline check weighers that are capturing weights and they are also being validated with separate manual quality checks.
I see. And in addition to that, do you generate certificate of analysis for shipments? And if so, what system is the system of record for that data?
We do not generate COAs.
I see. Okay. No problem. Another viewer had a question. Is the test and release program data entered within the CCP module?
Yes, I think so, if I understand the question correctly.
Okay. And another viewer had a question regarding using the MES. Do you use the MES in the retail or your consume products from the inventory when it is sold? I believe in using the MES in the retail division of your company.
No, we do not. MES extends only through our plants.
Gotcha. Okay. And which of the MES project aspects are managed by yourself, and which is managed by your system integrators?
That's a great question. So one of the powerful benefits of Workflow and Workflow Forms is we have pushed on our SI to keep it as much out of the box as possible so that we're better positioned in the future to manage our own deployments. And currently, I would say that 80% of the design and development is done by Callisto, but as we continue to deploy and build the tools based on the model-driven approach, we hope to add more and more of that to our own area of responsibility. I know that in the next plant, there's a number of areas that we'll be taking on that in our first plant were done specifically by the SI.
Okay, interesting. And regarding your quality, how much has your defect rate decreased?
How much has our defect rate decreased? Our defect rate, I don't know that it has decreased significantly, but we have a lot better visibility to it now, and our waste has decreased quite a bit. And when we are consuming what we call carryover, so the cheese that we didn't finish using today that we'll use tomorrow in the next process order, we will be able to carry that genealogy over from today's run of that process order to tomorrow's run of that process order, if that makes sense.
Okay, interesting. And this one might be a good one for Keith too. With this system, how are the regulatory requirements built into the system?
Yeah, so meeting regulatory requirements is usually all around kind of objective evidence. As the saying goes, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. So primarily, what we do with MES is provide that platform to collect and validate that the collected data is correct, and then make it available for regulatory reporting or other things. So Scott talked a little bit about that phenomenal improvement that they got in traceability through their mock audit. That's also directly then applicable to how they would meet their regulatory obligations under the Food Safety Modernization Act to be able to do that similar traceability. So Scott talked about it in the context of doing mock audits within their plant. That's part of their food safety program. But that's the underlying kind of capability, collection of information, and then making it available in a meaningful or useful fashion for regulatory and operational purposes.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, we had a food safety plan in place, and we were meeting all quality requirements and food safety requirements before we put in MES. So essentially, we started with everything we have on paper and digitizing it, and then leveraging the automatic functionalities of workflow so that now we are managing our quality with much more automation on the back end, and we're much more versatile and flexible in any changes we have to implement in our MES plants. So MES has positioned us better, but it's using the same tools that we started with years ago.
I see. So it wasn't so much that FISMA might have been the impetus to adopt this in your plant, but rather it's really just giving you more capability, more flexibility. It's just quicker, more efficient in that respect.
And more visibility too.
And more visibility. Interesting. Great. Well, that's I'm sure that helps things for sure. As Keith mentioned, the type of products and variation that's required now or expected from consumers is definitely changing the game. So in food and beverage. So an additional question here is how does the MES handle the failed or timed out consumption transactions from the ERP side?
So if I understand the question correctly, if we have a raw ingredient that may have expired in our inventory system, when we received that raw ingredient, we entered the expiration information at the point of receipt, and when we would go to try and consume it within MES, that expiration information is master data for that raw ingredient, and MES would prevent a coworker from consuming it.
Okay, interesting. And here's another question from a viewer. What is the value of the model-driven concept for Kwik Trip?
The model-driven concept allows us to stay out of the box with the tool and allows us to standardize on how the tools are designed for everything from all of the quality information I've talked about, but also in our next plant with performance. And it will be ready to be deployed then for the next line. So our next plant will be manufacturing bread and buns. But the tools we'll create in that plant will be backwards compatible, so we can just drop them in to our kitchens plant where we're making pizzas and soup as an example. So understanding our requirements from a broad perspective when we're designing these tools allows us to have them more adaptable to other manufacturing processes when we're redeploying them.
Okay. And so here's an interesting question. I think this might be talking, have implications for the foreign supplier verification program, but we have a question from one of our viewers. Do you import cheeses?
Do we import cheeses? I don't believe we do. I think all of our cheeses are domestic.
Okay, yeah, I think that was regarding the foreign supplier verification program in FISMA. So, but probably not applicable to you at this point. But and here's another question: how many MES databases do you currently have?
Let's go back to that one. I have my team listening in as well, so
okay.
they're typing away, and I'll answer that here shortly.
Great. Okay, perfect. We'll come back to that one. Here's another question from a viewer. We get a lot of questions about Enterprise Integrator. How have you found the interface between MES and ERP using this tool?
I think it's been versatile enough where we're managing all of our information errors successfully internally. So there's always going to be errors that need to be managed every day. Our manufacturing analyst is going through those errors and accounting for overconsumption, for example, and working with the plants to correct those errors in SAP so the inventories in SAP are accurately accounted for. And incidentally, we have at least 3 databases plus Historian.
Okay, great. And I believe this question is regarding using workflow in MES and keeping track of the workflow in MES. Is that something that you can speak to?
Yeah, I think so. Our MES developers, if they're troubleshooting a workflow issue, can go into the workflow tool and follow the transaction through workflow to see where the bottleneck might be, and then address it accordingly.
Okay. So, and I remember from your presentation, you were saying that you can track the actually more accurate labor costs through the system tracking the workflow from process order to manager to the time required to actually produce the product. So I think it's interesting. Another question regarding if there is a problem or you're seeing a problem or having a problem within your plant, how are you going about remedying that, and how possibly is the system helping remedy problems that you may have had in the past?
Well, through reporting, we can take a real detailed look at a specific process order, or we can take a broader approach and look at, for example, the raw ingredient and all the process orders it was used within, and then better understand the impact that the issue might be affecting in terms of process orders and finished products. So I think our biggest tool is through reporting and things like variance reports that we have. So if our recipe calls for 500 pounds of ingredient X, and we're continually consuming 600 pounds of ingredient X, through variance reporting, we can make adjustments to our master recipe in SAP or address it on the floor with the coworkers who are doing the actual consumption and help them understand why we shouldn't be using so much of that ingredient.
Mm-hmm. I think it was interesting too that you're talking about having the one true data. Is that what I remember you saying that before, which is interesting. Not different versions of the data, but just having the one master data in there. So I thought that was interesting too. And here is another question from a viewer. How are you dealing with the ISO standard on risk-based thinking from the ISO standard?
I am not familiar with that. Our food safety team is helping us with the requirements of our deployments, so they will bring that to light through that process.
And you are SQF certified, is that right? That's what you said, level 3, I believe?
Correct. All of our plants are.
And how has that helped with meeting your regulatory requirements with that auditing process?
Our plants are SQF ready every day, so our QA teams on the floor are always auditing. We're reviewing things monthly, we're reviewing records, and our quality manager has assured me that it's a lot easier to go through our MES reports and quality records to support any SQF auditing requirements in our MES plants than it is in our non-MES plants. So she is excited for MES to continue to be deployed.
That's great. Anything to make their jobs easier, right?
Yes, and more accurate, you bet.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a tough job. Okay, well, I just wanted to remind anyone if in the last few minutes here, if you have any questions that you're dying to ask, make sure you submit them. Actually, we've had a lot of great questions, so really great participation from our viewers today has been really, really excellent. So just give it a little bit more time here, and I'm not seeing any more questions. So I think what we'll go ahead and do here is just, unless we have any more, doesn't look to be. So I'm going to go ahead and then close the floor for questions, and I'd like to really thank Keith Chambers and Scott Schiebel for their presentations, as well as our sponsor, Schneider Electric. If you have any additional questions or comments, please don't hesitate to click the Email Us button on the console. Also, remember, as you exit today's webinar, please take a couple of minutes to complete our survey. We strongly welcome your detailed comments, and please visit foodengineeringmag.com/webinars for the archive of this presentation, as well as information about some of our other upcoming events. Also, please make sure you join us again for another edition of this webinar series. That webinar will be entitled Achieve Operational Excellence Through Digital Transformation, and that'll be airing on May 22nd at 10 a.m. Central Time. So we appreciate your time so much, and we really hope you found this webinar to be a valuable experience. Thanks so much. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.